Okay, BMW M54 motor, specifically the 3-litre one, M54 B30. Now there's two things you've got to watch out for that will completely destroy one of these engines. First up, if the head gasket goes on one of these, it's going to cause you a lot of issues. Now they're not very prone to doing the head gaskets, you know, we're not looking at a Rover K series here, but it can happen and it does happen. And usually it's when the engine gets cooked. Now how do you end up cooking one of these engines? It's usually down to cooling system failure. Now I've talked about this in other videos. It's usually down to the coolant loss, so it's your expansion tank failing, your radiator, water pump, thermostat, you know, these are all the things that can cause it to overheat. Now what does happen when it does get overheated, when the engine does get cooked, is that it's not so much the head gets warped initially. Now you've got an aluminium head on these engines and an aluminium block, and what happens is the threads that the head bolts are screwed into at the block, they get softened, the aluminium gets softened, they weaken, and the torque on them head bolts gets relieved, and then what happens is the head pressure relieves, so the head essentially lifts slightly, and this is what compromises the head gasket, causes it to overheat. Normally the head gets warped, and then them aluminium threads in the block, they get stretched out, they weaken, they soften. Now this can be repaired. You can get the head skimmed, and what you can do is time cert or helicoil the block, but it's sort of 50-50 with them threads in the block. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. My opinion is, if you've gone that far to cook the motor that bad, you might as well just pull it out, scrap it, and replace it with a good second-hand one, because it's, like I say, it's 50-50, and it's likely it's going to cause you issues further down the line, so it's not worth the trouble. But as always, the prevention's better than the cure. Now we've talked about this in other videos about replacing mostly cooling system components, especially if you just bought one of these cars. But listen, you don't have to go nuts straight away, you don't have to go spending $1,000, $2,000 replacing all them parts immediately. But what you do need to do is bloody well pay attention to what's going on. You're working towards getting them replaced. What you can do, the best idea, is just check your coolant level here, or maybe once a week, and then what I've done in the past, your plastic under tray under the engine there, and I'll keep the top side of that clean, maybe even armour all the top of it, and then leave it like that, put it back in place, and then every time you come and check your coolant level, maybe once a week, just shine a torch down here, down the gaps in the front of your engine there, and just check along the front there for any white spots. That'll be dried coolant. And obviously if anything like that does start appearing, you just need to identify it and then sort of work your way up, see what's leaking. Maybe it's a hose, maybe it's your expansion tank, you know, whatever. You will need the engine running and nice and hot to identify the actual coolant coming out of wherever it's leaking, because what, like the expansion tank for example, when you get a split down the side of it, when it's cold, that split's contracted, so it won't leak. You need that heat and that pressure. You need the whole system nice and hot and under pressure for that crack to expand, and then you'll see the leak. So it might be a case of, if you do identify any white spots, pull the under tray off, jack the front end of the car up, get it running nice and hot, and then have a good look. And keep in mind that temperature gauge on your cluster, on your dash there, it's heavily buffered. Now if you just slightly go past halfway, you want to be pulling over and having a look under the hood, see what's going on, because if that needle goes right into the red, it's too late, the engine's cooked, game over. And the main takeaway from this is bloody well pay attention to what's going on, and you should avoid any issues that way. Now then, the second thing you've got to watch out for with these engines is the oil pump nut. Now down in the sump there at the front of the engine, you've got your oil pump, and that's got a shaft on it with a skinny little nut holding the gear on, so it's chain driven. And what can happen, especially under high RPMs, is that little skinny oil pump nut can back off, and then obviously that's no good because the gear can become undriven, and then guess what, you got no oil pressure and your engine's going to seize, and there's not really much coming back from that. There's no real cure for a seized engine, but the prevention obviously is what we're looking at here. Now right now, 2020, it's likely if you've never done your oil pan gasket in one of these M54 motors, it's going to be leaking. So you're going to want to be pulling your oil pan off to sort out your oil pan gasket anyhow. Now while you're in there and the oil pan's off and out of the way, you've got perfect access to that oil pump nut, and there's three options you've got to secure that nut to ensure that it doesn't back off and cause you any issues. The first one is you can tack weld it in place. Now this is a very permanent solution, because if you ever want to remove it, you're going to have to go at it with a grinder, and you're likely to compromise the nuts and the threads and whatnot, so it is a bit too permanent for my liking. The other one is, there's kits available out there with the nut drilled out and a little safety wire that comes with the kit, and what you can do is install that nut and then thread the wire through, lock it in place, and that should avoid it backing off in the future. So the option I've taken in the past, which is my favourite solution, is to wire in there, pull the nut right off, give all them threads a real nice clean with some solvent or whatnot, get rid of all the oil, all the muck. You want it super clean, super dry. Put some red Loctite, some red thread locker on the threads, reinstall the nut, and give it approximately 24 hours to dry before you fill your engine back up with oil, and that should secure it in place nicely and avoid any issues further down the line. Just bear in mind that it is a left-hand thread, and when you're reinstalling it and torquing it up, it is very easy to strip it out because it's such a skinny nut also, so don't go mad. Anyhow, there you have it. There's the two main ways you can end up destroying one of these engines, and there's some solutions for you to avoid any issues with one of these M54 engines in the future. I'm MTech Guy, thanks for watching.